Think of your favorite images of the Rolling Stones. So many to choose from, right? Well, odds are that many of them were photographed by Paul Natkin. Throughout his incredible career, Paul Natkin has photographed some of the biggest legends of popular music. His work has graced album covers for artists such as Ozzy Osbourne and Buddy Guy, and on the covers of Newsweek, Ebony, People, and Spin, just to name a few. Paul first worked on the 1988 Expensive Winos tour to support Keith Richards' first solo album, Talk Is Cheap, and then went on to become the Stones' official photographer during the Steel Wheels tour, and then continued on the following Voodoo Lounge and Bridges to Babylon tours. As I began to shoot my own pictures at Stones shows, it was Paul Natkin's work that I used as a guide on how to get that perfect shot. It was a great thrill to speak to Mr. Natkin on his wild ride with his favorite band, the Rolling Stones. Do you remember the first time you heard the Stones? Do you remember what your first favorite songs were, your first favorite albums, when they came into your life?
Well, when I was in high school, which was in the dark ages, you couldn't be a Stones and a Beatles fan. You had to pick.
Right.
You had to be one or the other. And everybody that I went to school with was a Beatles fan. So just to be ornery, I became a Stones fan. Because they were the bad boys. They had their hair wasn't perfect, and they were great. And that's when I first started listening to them. I always liked them, and I always went to photograph them when they were in town. But the Talk Is Cheap period was the first time I ever actually met them.
Yeah, and that really was the spark that started the rest of the legend, really, with you and him and them, because
right.
It was kind of a happenstance situation how you even got the first gig to photograph Keith during that period, wasn't it?
Well, it was actually like more than happenstance. My next door neighbor was the music critic of the Sun-Times, Chicago Sun-Times, and he got an assignment to interview Keith in New York. And the Sun-Times was too cheap to send a photographer. So he called me up and he said, hey, if you want to pay your own way and fly to New York, you get a photo shoot with Keith Richards. And it's like, hey, you don't have to ask twice. And at that point, a plane ticket was like $300. And I figured, okay, I can make a few bucks off of these pictures. This could be cool. So he had a hotel room. So I slept on the floor in his hotel room so I wouldn't have to get my own room. And the next morning we got up and we walked down the street to Keith's manager's office and knocked on the door. Door opens up and there's Keith Richards standing there. And that was my introduction to him. That's the day I took this picture.
Well, that's amazing. And Keith comes off as a guy who, I don't know, he's like everyone's friend or something. I assume he's a very charming guy.
Well, he probably doesn't want people to say this, but because he cultivates an image.
Right.
But he's probably the nicest person I've ever met in the music business.
Is that right?
And the most giving.
Yeah.
He'll do anything you need him to do to make for a good picture. But the funny thing is he doesn't smile a lot in pictures.
That's true.
But, he and I get along great, so he always smiles when I take pictures of him.
Do you kind of, when you're behind the camera and you're like in this shot in particular, are you leaving little breadcrumbs for him to kind of latch onto, to smile and to laugh, or is it just he's in a giddy mood?
Well, we mostly talk about Chicago blues.
Oh, nice.
Because I'm the only person in the Stones camp that knows as much as he knows about Chicago blues.
Right.
So in between shots, he'll always talk about like, hey, do you remember so-and-so? And, do you have this album? And, that kind of thing.
Oh, that's great. That's a great middle ground because he can probably talk for hours.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
And so this photo shoot was only 10 minutes long. Do I have that right?
It's actually probably 5 minutes long.
Man.
And I shot 3 rolls of film, 12 shots to a roll.
Wow.
And that was it. And I started packing up my stuff. And at that point, my friend Don started interviewing him at the other end of the room. And I'm packing up my stuff thinking, okay, I just had the greatest moment of my life. I'm done. I don't have to worry about anything else anymore. And they started talking about the fact that Talk is Cheap had just come out, and was he going to tour? Because the idea of a Stones guy touring without the Stones was unheard of.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And he used to ridicule Mick for touring when he put out his solo albums.
Right.
And Keith said, yeah, we're going to go out on tour in a couple months with the band from Talk is Cheap. And I just, hey, that's nice. And then I got home the next day to Chicago, and I was making prints for the Sun-Times. And I decided I'm in the darkroom. It only costs $0.25 to make a print. I'll make an extra one of each one, and washed them and dried them and put my stamp on the back with my name and address, copyright notice. And I sent him off to his manager with a little note that was like 2 lines long. It just said, hey, I heard you're going out on the road. If you need a tour photographer, give me a call. Having no idea what a tour photographer did or how you do it, having never been on the road before in my life.
But it sounds nice, doesn't it? It's a good note.
Sounds great. It sounds like, like a good career move. So I just put the prints in an envelope. I put some stamps on it, walked to the corner, dumped it in the mailbox. Figured, okay, I tried. Nothing's ever going to come of this, but what the heck? So, and I just forgot about it. This was in September.
Is it?
Of 87. I think it was 87. 88, maybe? 88. And the day before Thanksgiving, my phone rings. I pick up the phone, and it's Keith's manager. And she says, so what are you doing tomorrow?
Uh-oh.
And I said, well, I was planning on going to my parents' house for Thanksgiving dinner. And she said, nope, not going to happen. She says, pack up your stuff, buy a plane ticket, fly down to Atlanta, come to the Ritz-Carlton when you get here, call my room when you get here. Next morning I got up and flew to Atlanta, having no idea how you be a tour photographer.
See, that's one of the blessings back then of not having caller ID, right? You had to pick up every phone call.
Yeah, right. I mean, I probably wouldn't have picked it up because now I don't pick it up unless I know who's calling.
Exactly.
So I call her room and she says, well, stay down in the lobby. We'll be there in about an hour. So I went and bought a newspaper and sat and read a newspaper. Elevator opens up and Keith comes out of the elevator and the rest of the band.
Oh my God.
And his manager comes out and she says, okay, get in that van over there. So I put my luggage in the back of the van and we go to the gig.
Did Keith remember you?
Not really, sort of. Now he remembers me, but in those days, it's like he met me once for 10 minutes.
Right.
So we go to the gig, I shoot the pictures, and then, okay, what do I do now? We get on a tour bus, and we're traveling to the next city. And I'm sitting in the front, Keith's in the back with the band. I have no idea what the etiquette is for being on a tour bus, but I'm just minding my own business. And she comes up and says, well, so when can I see the pictures? And I'm thinking, this is back in the days of film.
Right.
So, okay, I got to get this film processed. So I think we were going to Boston that night. So we got there, middle of the night, checked in the hotel, found the phone book, back when there were phone books, and no internet, no computers.
Right.
And I looked up photo labs in Boston. And I picked the one with the biggest ad.
Okay. That'd count as a Google review.
The one that looked the most professional.
Sure.
And I went down to the front desk. It's like 3 o'clock in the morning, 4 o'clock in the morning. Went down to the front desk and I said, do you have a big envelope? And they gave me an envelope and I put all my film in it, sealed it up, wrote my information on the front. And I got in the cab and went to the lab and dropped it in their Dropbox, not knowing if I would even be able to pick it up the next day. So I went back the next day and it was ready. And I picked it up, showed it to her. And we started on tour. And we started doing this in every city we went to.
Amazing.
And, there's the result right there.
Yeah. I mean, I think one of the things that I'm attracted to in your shots is the realism. I'm so attracted to the tones and the colors here. And there's such a natural balance between the concert lighting, which of course can be bright, but also there's some darkness, which I love in concert photography. I find that a lot of concert photography today is just so brightly lit and it's just, so perfect. But this looks to me like how it would look like if I was right there in front of Keith, which I love.
Yeah, you got to make it look good. You got to make it look real. And it's all about, like using what's there, using whatever lighting is there.
And there's this fantastic shot, which I've seen everywhere. This is one of the great iconic shots of the whole band.
This is gone everywhere. And the really crazy part of it is there's one person missing from the shot, and that's Sarah Dash.
Oh, okay. Yes, singer. Mm-hmm.
Who usually didn't go out and bow with them at the end of the show.
Is that right?
For some reason. But it's everybody else from the Winos.
Yeah.
And that's it's their official publicity shot for years.
When you're shooting Keith during this time, are you learning anything about how he moves on stage or?
Oh, absolutely. I can mimic any move that he makes on stage to this day.
Yeah.
And, the whole deal is like waiting for things to happen. You don't just shoot because you have a camera in your hand. You shoot when things happen.
Right.
So there are certain moves that he makes all the time. I know exactly when he's going to make them. And it's a matter of being ready.
Needless to say, on songs like Jumpin' Jack Flash, you have that finger on the trigger.
Yeah, his most rock stars are pretty predictable.
Right.
And I always have a saying that when somebody climbs up on something, there's only two ways they can get down. And one way is going to look really cool and one way is not.
Right.
So they're going to jump. And it's a matter of, being ready for it.
In many ways, you were ready for the next steps here because after the success of this solo tour, you kind of repeated a little bit of the same magic you did last time by leaving a note for hopefully call me again if you need me, didn't you?
Well, I after the Winos tour, I figured I couldn't go. I'd reached the ceiling. I couldn't do any better than that. And then they announced that the Stones were getting back together and, Mick and Keith weren't fighting anymore.
Okay.
And, okay, got to try it again. So I wrote the same note. And it didn't work. The tour started, and I'm reading about it in the paper and seeing it on TV, and they didn't call me. A month goes by, nothing. And then all of a sudden, I get a call from Keith's manager. What are you doing tomorrow?
There you go.
And same thing. And I was supposed to do a month with them. And about 3 weeks into it, I get a call saying, can you come up to my room? So I go up to a room and Mick's manager is there and Keith's manager is there and the publicist is there. It's like being called to the principal's office times 3.
You're right. Are you in trouble?
I figured, what did I do? At least let me finish the month.
Right.
There's like 4 more shows. And I'm thinking, better go and start packing. I must have done something wrong. And they said, well, we have this problem. And I said, what? And they said, well, we know you're only supposed to do a month, but everybody in the band really likes you. and we like your work, and we like what you do, and we like the fact that you're really low key. Like, I don't go and hang out in the dressing room. I go and hang out with Keith, when he's practicing. But I'll go in and take pictures of Mick when he's working out every once in a while. But mostly, I just hang out and watch TV backstage, and I don't bother them. So they said, you got to come and shoot the rest of the tour, which was another 2.5 months after that.
Wow.
And I wasn't prepared for that. But, you don't say no to the Rolling Stones.
Mm-mm.
So I did it.
Yeah. Well, I don't blame you.
Yeah. It was kind of cool.
And this is one of those images that I've seen everywhere as well. And it's one of my favorite Keith shots. When you're watching a Stone show, or maybe just any show, is your eye behind the camera the whole time and watching the show through the camera, and then you got to hit the button when you see it, or are you taking breaks? Are you moving around the camera?
Both.
Yeah.
I mean, I will say this: when 20,000 light years from home comes up, I go backstage and make myself a sandwich.
And you got to hear that every night on the Steel Wheels tour.
Yeah.
That was the first time they played it.
All the lights are green and blue. And they look, it's very psychedelic, but it doesn't look good on camera.
Right. And Mick would do that crazy kind of aerial dance thing.
So that's my time there's a big TV backstage. So I go and make myself a sandwich and sit back there and eat it and watch the TV. And when the song was almost over, I'd go back out in front.
Did you ever tell the band your feelings about that song?
No. There are people that love that song, and I know why they put it in their set.
Yeah.
Who am I to say?
This is another one of my favorite shots, and the rehearsals, the sound checks. And this is probably where it came from, right?
Yeah, I'd just walk around on stage while they're doing sound check and look for things happening. And, that it isn't as glamorous as it sounds. It's like most of it is pretty boring. They're trying to work out details of a song. They don't really do a lot on stage. Ronnie always tries to pose for me because he's a ham, but the rest of them just ignore me, and I go on my way. Charlie loved being photographed.
This is another one of my favorite shots from this tour, and I don't know if you feel the same way, but for me, it's almost like whenever Mick and Keith are in the same frame, it's almost like too much for the camera to handle or something.
Well, the goal is always to get more than one guy in the picture.
Well, each couplet in a way has their own magic. Keith and Ronnie are so brotherly. That's so great to watch them. But Mick and Keith, whenever they're together in a shot, and I love this one. There's something very honest about Keith here, which I love seeing. You captured well.
Yep.
This next shot alludes to what you were mentioning earlier. These portrait shots from this era. How did these come about? This seemed kind of outliers compared to a lot of the live on stage.
Yeah, I didn't do a whole lot of this, but whenever I had a chance to do it, I think some magazine wanted a portrait of Mick, and so this was just a curtain backstage, and I set up a couple lights and shot a roll of film, and then there's a famous guy that was the Stones roadie for like 50 years. His name was Chooch McGee.
Sure.
And he's since passed away. But he was Charlie's roadie. So he walked by as I was shooting these pictures of Mick. And he said, "Oh, man, when you're done, don't break down your stuff. Let me go get Charlie. He might want some pictures done."
Wow, that's so cool.
And he wanted a picture of himself with Charlie.
Oh, okay.
Which I took. And then I said, "Hey, Charlie, grab that drum and let's, get some pictures." And it's one of my favorite pictures of him.
What was Charlie like? Because you alluded to this earlier, and I find it interesting that for a guy who really kept to himself, he really knew how to work a camera, just like Mick or anyone else.
Well, he was in the Jewish religion, we call it a mensch. He was just a really nice guy, very quiet, but kind of playful.
Really,
but he was he totally devoted to his wife. We were at Shea Stadium. We were doing 4 nights at Shea Stadium, and when we drove in one day, Shirley saw a bunch of police horses outside.
Mm-hmm.
with cops on the horses, and they were just lined up on the street in case there was a riot or something. And so she decided after sound check that she had to go out and feed the horses. She's a big horse person.
Yes.
They have a bunch of horses on their farm. So Charlie obviously couldn't go out there with her because he's Charlie Watts.
Right.
So we're just all sitting around backstage, and he calls me over. He says, "Hey, can you do me a favor? Can you take Shirley out so she can feed the horses?" I said, "Yeah, sure, no problem." So we hit our passes so nobody who could see that we were with the band. And she grabbed a basket full of apples, and we walked outside, and we walked up and down the line of horses, and she gave each horse an apple. And the cops probably thought she was just some old lady from the neighborhood and had no idea who she was or why we were there. And then we went backstage again, and Charlie was like effusive in his praise.
Oh,
For how great it was that I helped him out or helped her out. That to me was a much cooler moment than taking pictures of him playing drums on stage.
sure. That would have been great to have a shot of Charlie on the horse if that was possible. But I think
that wasn't going to happen that day. That's for sure.
I guess not.
I read the last time I saw Charlie, they were in town in 2015,
Mm-hmm.
and they went to visit Buddy Guy at his club,
Mm-hmm.
and I work with Buddy Guy too. I'm kind of his photographer,
Right.
and so I was there that night, and at one point I started gathering everybody together to take a picture, and Mick and Keith are like, "Yeah, sure, whatever you want." And Charlie was the only one that walked up to me and said, "So how's your business? How's everything going?" Yeah, that picture right there. "How's everything going with you? You're doing okay?" And he was very, it's like a big brother.
Oh, that's fantastic.
That's the last time I saw him.
Oh, man. That says a lot about his character that, A, he remembered you and he was inquiring. And it seems like you really did him a solid with helping Shirley that day.
Ronnie, on the other hand, when every tour starts, he'll come up to me the first day and look at me and say, "Do I know you from somewhere?"
He's a goofball, isn't he?
Yeah, he certainly is.
You had obviously a very special bond with all the guys, and I think probably Keith more so. But how did you find Mick to be, especially when you were shooting him? Was he a tricky one to kind of manage?
Well, it's not a matter of managing him. Basically, there's the Mick camp and the Keith camp, and you're in one or the other.
Right.
And each one of them has their own entourage.
Uh-huh.
And I was always in Keith's camp. So I got along with the Mick people, but Mick is all business, like when you're ready to take pictures, he's ready to go.
Right.
Keith is the kind of person you can hang out with. My favorite story of all time with Mick, we were in Winnipeg, and we had an off day before the show. And I was kind of the guy on tour that would find a restaurant for the band. Not the Stones, but the backup people. The horn guys and keyboards and the backup singers. So I found this Chinese restaurant about 4 blocks from the hotel. We all met in the lobby at 6 o'clock. And we always used to put a note under all the Stones guys' doors saying, "Hey, we're going to so-and-so place. If you want to come along, come on by." They never showed up. They stayed in their rooms. But so we go to this Chinese restaurant, and on the way there was there's a bar, and they were holding a Mick Jagger lookalike contest. And the winner would get 2 tickets for the show the next night. So, okay, no problem. We walked by the bar, we went to the restaurant, and we sat down. Like 10 minutes later, the door of the restaurant opens up, and Mick walks in.
Cool.
Nobody in the restaurant knew who he was. They were all like Chinese immigrants.
Right.
It was just some guy with an English accent. So he sat down with us and we're talking. And at one point, you probably figured this out already. I kind of say whatever I feel like saying. I have no governor on my brain.
Right.
And I looked across the table at him and I said, "Hey, Mick, I got an idea. On the way back to the hotel, we should stop at this bar and you should enter this lookalike contest. My guess is you probably come in the top 3." And everybody at the table's looking at me like, "Oh man, he's going to be sent home tomorrow. It's over. We're never going to see this again." And all of a sudden, he just started laughing. I thought he was going to fall off his chair laughing.
Oh God! If you could have caught that, a line of Mick Jagger lookalikes and their flashy
I didn't even
shirt.
have a camera with me. It would have been terrible because I didn't bring a camera to dinner because I'm going out with the backup singers. Right? We're just friends.
That's hilarious. I think this is another shot that just been everywhere, and it's of the final bows, which my understanding, if my calculations are correct, they never really did the final bows until the 1989 tour, Steel Wheels. They never really did final bows before.
I don't know anything about that because I was never allowed to shoot the whole show until that.
Mm-hmm.
But I know they did it, and I knew it was an important shot. So, but usually the deal is that I got to leave when the last song starts because I got to be in the van when they walk off the stage.
Right.
If we're going to the airport that night.
Right.
Because they're not going to wait for me.
Right.
I got to be ready. I got to be in the van before they get there.
Right.
So this was at the pay-per-view in Atlantic City at, believe it or not, Trump Casino. And I knew I could walk back to the hotel after that.
I see.
So I didn't have to get in a van. So I'd use that as an opportunity. Every time I could not have to be in the van, I would get a shot of them bowing.
Yeah, and it's always a special moment. I find, and I think a lot of Stones fans find the final bow to be special because for me personally, it's almost like, at least when I look at Mick Jagger, the masks are off. It's just him reacting to the moment and him celebrating. We did it.
But it's also, it's like every time it could be the last time.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
This photo ended up being a poster for the IMAX movie that year. Right. It's been everywhere. Because most people never got to shoot that because they were either kicked out after 3 songs or they were, had to be in the van before the band got there.
Exactly. That's what I wanted to highlight is that you can't get shots like this today because of this unofficial official rule that everyone's got to leave. Photographers got to leave after the first 3 songs, which is ridiculous.
People shoot the 3 songs and then all the good stuff starts happening.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I've heard you mention that, it's a shame that artists don't want, their most, vulnerable or their not best looking moments to be captured. When they get sweaty, they get disheveled. But hey, that's also some interesting moments. And it's a shame those go away.
That's rock and roll.
That's right. It is rock and roll. And so we move on to Voodoo Lounge era. This is something I discovered while looking through your website, was that you were present during the Love is Strong video shoot, which for me and for a lot of fans is was my favorite videos of them. And I just love it. And the fact that David Fincher directed it is just a cherry on top.
Another guy that hates me because of this shot.
Is that right?
No, not hates me, but he so the story is the whole video was shot on a green screen.
Right.
And then they shot scenic black and white of New York City. And they blew up the Stones to be 40 feet tall and walking through New York City. So it was kind of like a waste to be shooting pictures of the band because there was no background.
Right.
But somebody in management said, hey, they're all dressed. They got good makeup on and all that. Get them together to take a picture. So I walked up to David Fincher and said, hey, when's a good time for me to do a photo of them? And he said, never. And I said, well, I'm going to wait till there's a break in the action and I'm going to jump in there. And, this was probably a 20-second photo shoot.
Wow.
I probably took 4 frames.
Wow.
And he was standing there tapping his watch okay, let's go, get moving. I wanted to shoot stuff like this because shooting a picture of Ronnie playing guitar on a green background doesn't really do anybody any good.
Right.
I mean, it's a really ugly color. If I was picking a background to do a portrait of Ronnie Wood, it wouldn't be on a green background.
Yeah.
But that's how they take the background out and add in the scenes in New York.
Bridges to Babylon, did that come about as well? Were you kind of added on last minute as well?
Well, that was different because the tour started in Chicago.
Yeah.
Soldier Field.
Right.
So I got a call about a week before they came to town, and they said, we want you to come and shoot all the rehearsals. Because they did like 4 days of rehearsals. So I'm basically in this giant football stadium, and they're playing for me.
Mm-hmm.
They're playing their shows just for me.
Amazing.
And, well, not just for me, but,
Right.
And then they played the famous show at the Double Door.
Mm-hmm.
And that was after the fourth day. Yeah, this shot. That was after the fourth day of rehearsals. And then the tour started the next night. And I did those 2 nights. And at that point, they decided they didn't really need a tour photographer anymore. But they wanted me to go to Nashville with them the next day because they knew I knew a lot of country music artists.
I see.
And they figured I could go in the VIP lounge and pick out like famous people and bring them back to be photographed with the Stones. So the second night at Soldier Field, I jumped in the van and got on a plane with them and went to Nashville and shot that show. And there weren't a lot of famous country people that showed up.
Yeah.
And then I went back to the hotel. They left town, and I flew home the next day. And that was the only part of the tour that I did on that tour.
I see. Well, I was telling you offline that this shot in particular means the world to me because I found this online on the World Wide Web back then. Back then I went to the internet at my local library 1 hour each Saturday. I'd go online and look up all the news I could about the Stones. And this picture came up with the news of this show. And then a couple weeks later, I was at my local record store, coincidentally called Rolling Stone Records up in Chicago. In Irving Park. And they always had a selection of bootlegs or imports, they would call it. And there it was, the Double Door show. And it was one of my first ever Stones CDs. And to hear the audience recording of this show and picture this image in my mind, I mean, it had been with me for years, man, I'm telling you. So that show must have been crazy.
Yeah, they wanted me to just meet them at the club.
Uh-huh.
And this is my ego talking. I didn't want to just go to the club and hang out there till they showed up because I wanted to get out of the van with the band in front of all the press in Chicago because it's my hometown.
Oh,
So
man, I don't blame you.
I drove down to the Ritz-Carlton and I paid $75 to park my car down there. And I got in a van with Keith. And, as he was known to do, he gets out of the van first and he holds the door for everybody else. So he jumped out of the van, held the door for me. I got out, put his arm over my shoulder, and we walked right past all the press, all the TV cameras into the club. And that changed the whole perspective of what people thought about me in Chicago.
Some cred.
It was a good career move.
Yeah, smart thinking. What would you say your impression was of the Mick and Keith dynamic?
It was interesting. Keith's the music guy. Mick is the business guy.
Mm-hmm.
I know Keith cares about the business, but he doesn't care about it the way Mick cares about it.
Mm-hmm.
And, Mick makes disco records and Keith doesn't. So, it's like, they have their own space. Keith goes to the back of the plane. Mick goes to the front of the plane.
These are basically like portraits to me. I mean, these are such perfect shots.
Well, he's a great subject, hard to miss. My favorite part of this whole thing is Tommy Hilfiger was the tour sponsor.
Uh-huh.
And he showed up at rehearsals with $1 million worth of clothes for the band to wear on stage during the tour. And Keith walked around, looked at all the clothes, and went back to the hotel that night and called his wife back in Connecticut and said, go down to the basement and get everything that I've got that has animal print on it and FedEx it to me. And that's all he wore for the whole tour. He was the fashion icon on that tour.
But Charlie is just such a natural in front of the camera.
Well, this was at sound check.
Mm-hmm.
So I was able to walk right up, and climb up on the drum riser.
Wow.
But then the first time I did that at sound check, Charlie looks at me and he says, you could do that during the show too. And it's like, oh yeah, sure. I'm just going to walk out on stage with the Rolling Stones. No problem. So then a couple nights later, I figured, okay, he told me I could do it. I'm going to do it. And I walked around the back and I climbed the stairs and I walked up on stage and I walked right out on stage and I climbed up on the drum riser and I'm taking pictures of him. I turned around and I'm standing on stage in between Mick and Keith in front of 80,000 people in a football stadium. And I don't think I ever did that again.
Could you feel that whole energy, the whole power of the audience?
Oh yeah, it's like being in a hurricane.
Wow.
Every night. I mean, where I was on a platform right in front of the stage.
Mm-hmm.
And it was, like right in between them and the audience.
The eye of the hurricane.
Yeah, it was like being in a hurricane every night. There's no other band that could ever accomplish that.
This is one of my favorite shots, which was, I first came across this in the book, The Rolling Stones, A Life on the Road. They used it towards the back, towards the end.
It was the back cover, I think.
Yeah. And
see, nobody ever thinks to shoot a shot like that.
Right.
And I did it because it was one of those nights when I didn't have to get in the van. And I could shoot the picture and just let them go in the vans and I would walk back to the hotel.
Right.
And I just had the idea that this was going to be a good shot, which it was.
Those are some of my most favorite shots of all time, man. I'm telling you. And you shot mostly on film that whole time, right?
It was all film.
All film.
It was all film. Totally different now.
Right.
Because now, shortly after that, I started shooting digital, and they were playing at the Aragon here in Chicago.
Oh, I was at that show.
And Bono came out on stage to play with them.
Was it?
And I shot Mick and Bono together. And within 3 minutes of the song ending, the publicist was in the photo pit saying, okay, when can I see the picture? And I had to go under the stage and open up my laptop and download the photos. And she picked a photo, and I had to send it to Rolling Stone magazine.
Wow.
From under the stage.
Would you tell people where to find most of your work so they could purchase it and celebrate it?
A number of ways. There's the only way to purchase it is through a place called Morrison Hotel Gallery.
Mm-hmm.
MorrisonHotelGallery.com, which is an art gallery. And I have a selection of stuff up there. Otherwise, people just have to look at it online. My site or Getty Images.
Mm-hmm.
So just search my name on Getty Images or go to natkin.net.
Well, I highly suggest everyone to do that because Paul is incredibly talented, and these images should be looked at and enjoyed because they brought me a lot of joy. So, Paul, this has been great fun. Thank you so much. I really do appreciate it.
Cool.
Be sure to also check out Paul's work in his book, Natkin, The Moment of Truth, which collects over 100 of his amazing shots in nearly 300 pages. It's an incredible collection that's available everywhere books are sold.